Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to the second hour of Just Energy Radio. Thank you all for staying tuned to the show today. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And if you've missed an episode, please do check out our show archives on the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's justenergyradio.com. And sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of who's coming on the show. Or go to our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio on YouTube. And when you're there, subscribe to the channel because then you'll be informed of whenever we load a new show archive. So in this hour, we're going to be speaking with Dennis Stone about the mystery of Stonehenge, America's Stonehenge. Let me tell you a little bit about Dennis and get him on the air. Dennis Stone grew up at America's Stonehenge and has been involved with the site for at least 55 years and has met a variety of researchers. Also a full-time airline captain, Dennis has traveled extensively around the world to other ancient sites in Europe and North America. He has been on numerous television and radio shows since 1970. When he is not flying, Dennis spends his time at America's Stonehenge, where his wife, Pat, manages the day-to-day operations of the site. Their son, Kelsey, who is an engineer, has also taken an interest in ongoing research. So the owner, caretaker, I don't know, we're going to find out exactly what his role is, of America's Stonehenge. The webpage is stonehengeusa.com. Dennis Stone. Hi, Dennis. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Rita. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm so glad you were able to get time in your very, very busy schedule to spend with us here on Just Energy Radio.
Thank you very much for having me on this evening.
So, what's the story about America's Stonehenge? I mean, you grew up there or lived there for the last 55 years. But where does the story really begin? I mean, you know, you don't look that old. So, and I'm figuring you didn't buy the property or, you know, become involved with the property when you were like 3. So, you know, what's the story? How did this whole thing start?
Yeah, actually, I'm not 4,000 years old like the site. I'm starting to get there. Getting closer, I think, every day. But my dad actually was the one, Robert Stone, that got involved with it back in the 1950s. And my dad had just got out of the Coast Guard, and he had spent a couple of years in Labrador, right near Newfoundland, actually, not too far from the Vikings landed. And he always had an interest in history. He loved reading about the Vikings, Columbus, and just basically ancient history. And that was kind of a thing that he was always, since a kid, he was interested in that. After he got out of the Coast Guard, he went to work for AT&T, Bell Laboratories as an engineer. And on Friday nights, he used to listen to a radio, just like we're talking on a radio station. And it was one of the biggest stations in New England, and it's out of Boston. And they've been around for about 80 years. I think he just celebrated their 75th or something like that. He used to listen to it up in Labrador, as a matter of fact, and stay in touch with home that way. But it was a show called Yankee Yarns, and Alton Hall Blackington was the host. And this one particular evening, they were talking about what we call America's Stonehenge today, and it really got his interest. He never heard of it, and he only lived about 8 miles from the place. And, there was on the radio, and a little bit later in the year, they had it on again, talking about this mysterious place. And when he was at a barber shop shortly after the first time heard about it on the radio, he was waiting to have a haircut. He saw a magazine article, and sure enough, it was a story about the site in North Salem. And I think that clinched it for him, and he asked the barber if he could keep the article. It was from a magazine called New Hampshire Profile Magazine, 1952. It had been sitting in the barber shop for about 3 years, I guess. And the next weekend, they were playing cards at my aunt's house, and he pulled up the magazine and showed it to some of the people over there playing cards. Has anybody heard of this place? And my aunt and uncle go, yeah, we used to go there in the 1930s, and we picnicked down there. We rode our bikes down there, about 8 or 9 miles to the place, and it was an unofficial picnic area for a lot of people. So that's where the story really began with my dad and his love of the place, and it stayed with him all the way through his life till he passed away in 2009.
And so you've just stayed with it. I guess you find it just as fascinating as he does.
Absolutely, yeah. I was actually, you mentioned 3. I think that's about the age I was. So I was born in 54. Actually, I was about 1 year old when they first heard about it, but when we opened it up to the public, I was just turning 4 in 1958. So we just celebrated our 55th year being open to the public. And so it's been with me my whole life, and also my son Kelsey, who, like you mentioned, is an engineer. And he's very interested in it too, and he's traveled quite a bit. Everywhere we took him when he was a kid, it was always to one of these ancient sites, just like my family took me on vacations. And when I wanted to go to Disney World, we went to see some old stone ruins, but now I really appreciate it, So it's been with us for a long time.
So let's talk logistics here for a second. Where is this Stonehenge? I mean, you said Salem, so like Salem, Massachusetts, where they burn witches?
Yeah, actually, you get confused with Salem, Mass. We're I think probably about 20 miles as the crow flies from Salem, Mass. And around Halloween time, a lot of people come to our town looking for the witches. And we've had them at our site. We've had Wig up there over the years, and Laurie Cabot, America's official witch out of Salem, Massachusetts. But we're about 30 miles from there. We're actually in New Hampshire, and so it's always kind of a running joke when people come to our place. You're about 30 miles from the actual Salem, Mass, where you want to be. But you can take a tour of our site too, if you want when you're here. But we're in southern New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston, and as crow flies, we're only 18 miles from the ocean. So if you're in Boston, it'll take you about 40 minutes to about an hour to reach our site right up the highway. So it's pretty accessible from Boston.
Well, they might have done some burning at the stake at that site at some time. You don't know. You could just add that to the mythos of the site.
Well, we still have a big table there that could have, been used for something like that kind of purpose. As far as like perhaps some sort of sacrifice or ceremony, the big table there. And H.P. Lovecraft actually was in this site in the 1930s. He visited and he was inspired by the site and the table, I think, for the Dunwich Horror that he wrote. And they think they still have H.P. Lovecraft meetings. I read at one point they had like 5,000 people attend one of these conventions for H.P. Lovecraft. But he's one of the early ones to visit our site, and I think he's Stephen King's, favorite novelist, I think.
Are you still there, Dennis?
Oh, yeah. I think I lost you.
Yeah, well, I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I should talk or not talk.
No, you can talk.
Well, no, because I thought I lost you too, so that's why I just... Anyway, okay.
Well, the phone made a funny noise too, so I said, I think we got cut off, so that's why I stopped.
No, it's the aliens. It's the aliens. That's my new thing. It used to be the gremlins, and then it was the ghosts. Now it's the aliens. So I have to tell you, I've had Scott Walter on the show a couple of times, and I knew he was coming back on, and I had just interacted with you about you coming on the show to talk about America's Stonehenge, and I put America on Earth on, and boom, guess what show it was?
It wasn't us, was it?
It was.
Oh, that's great.
It was really cool. Well, I don't think they have it where you can like go to, like the save shows, on your cable box to watch, anyway, I'm just going to sound dumb if I keep talking. So I'll just continue on with what I know. So any thoughts on who built this site?
Well, that's the question. Who built this site and when did they build it? What did they use it for? And what happened to the people that built it? I've been doing research on our site since the 1930s, and the first researcher up there was a Mr. Goodwin, who, when he ended up buying the site, he purchased it specifically because of the structures. He had a theory that the Irish Calvi monks came to America about 1,000 years ago. They were being chased by the Vikings. And he wrote several books. He was an insurance millionaire from Hartford, Connecticut, and his first cousin was J.P. Morgan, actually. And the Goodwin was on the West Coast, and he really has quite a biography, and he worked on Native American mounds in the Midwest. He looked for where Columbus landed in Hispaniola on one of his, I think, his first of 4 voyages. And he wrote The Truth About Leif Erikson. But he later changed his mind from, when he first saw the site, the first time he saw the site, he thought it was a Viking site. And as he uncovered the brush and the debris, he began believing that it was an Irish Calvi monk monastery. And he was aware of about 15 other sites in the Northeast, and he thought they may be related. And he died in 1950 still believing that the Irish Calvi monks had built the site. Over the years, we have found different pieces of evidence that suggest the site goes back about 4,000 years. So it's a much older site than Mr. Goodwin would have thought, about 3,000 years older. And the style of construction up there looks very reminiscent of what you find in European sites. There are about 50,000 megalithic sites in Europe, but these megalithic sites cover 5 continents, actually. North America, we have about 800 in the Northeast. Colombia, South America has a number of these same, very similar type structures. And they're also in Africa, and they're in Asia, and they go right into Korea. There's about 80,000, or there were 80,000 megalithic sites in Korea. Look like a lot of places, a lot of them have been destroyed by modern development. But these same type of structures are all over the world, and they have a very similar architecture to them.
I mean, because I've looked at pictures of the sites, and, the way that the stones are stacked on each other, it kind of reminds me maybe a little bit of like Newgrange or some of the stuff you find in England, and Great Britain. But are there, actually megaliths on there? Are there giant standing stones on the property as well?
Yeah, at our site and other New England sites. But our site has very large stones. One of them weighs about 50 tons, and it was part of the largest chamber called the Oracle Chamber, which is one of the biggest structures still remaining on the site. One of the tallest stones we have is a 14-foot stone. It's a monolith, but we refer to it as a menhir, meaning a long stone, and it has a shape very similar to some of the stones you see like Stennis over in Scotland. And there's a couple other sites in Scotland, too, that are very similar, about the same height, the same shape, and the top of the stone is slope-like. And they were used for astronomical purposes over there. And our 14-foot monolith was used for a star alignment, we believe. And we have dolmens in New England, big, large slabs with legs underneath them. The Westport, Massachusetts is one I can think of offhand. And another one is just north of New York City, in North Salem, New York. We're in North Salem, New Hampshire, so the same name. It's on the Hudson River, and there are about 200 megalithic type sites. We don't know how old they are, but they have a similarity to the megalithic sites of Europe in their size, shape, and style of these structures. And if you go north, like you mentioned, Newgrange in Ireland, in the Boyne Valley, there are about 200 megalithic sites in the Boyne Valley on the river. And it's very similar to New York, just north of New York City, about 200 right there on the Westchester and Putnam County area. It's the highest density of megalithic type sites in the New World that I'm aware of. So, but we have structures.
See, I just find this. I had Hugh Newman. Oh,
sure.
I had Hugh Newman on the show. I don't know. We were talking about this. It was a couple of years ago, and they were doing one of his Megalithomania in New England. And I was like, "Why are you doing it there?" And he said, "Well, because there are so many megalithic sites in New England." And I'm like, "Really?" I mean, yeah. I'm from New York, and I only have heard about it, a couple of years ago that there are all these sites. And I just find it fascinating, that you're talking about, oh, well, there are all these dolmen, there are all this and that. It's like, it's got to be, the United States' biggest secret because you don't hear about them.
Absolutely right. It's probably one of the biggest secrets of our history or our past, And some of the first sites, when people came over, they actually wrote about them. There was a letter from a gentleman named John Pynchon in 1654 who wrote to a Governor Winthrop, and he said, who built the structures? And we think it was a Benjywarm site down in Groton, Connecticut, not too far from the Navy base. And it's a very large site. It covers about 200 acres. The dating on it seems to be more around 600 A.D. It's not as old as our site, but it's before Columbus, before the Viking period. And it has a couple Christian symbols in it. It has a couple chambers that are somewhat similar to our structures, like what we call the watch house, a very similar style. But it seems to be a little bit later site. But somebody in 1654 was trying to figure out what this thing was back then, and yet our forefathers were the ones that, according to some skeptics, built all these structures, in the last couple hundred years.
Well, of course. But where did the 4,000... You said 4,000 years ago, not 4,000 BC, correct?
That is correct, yep, 2000 BC.
So where did that date come from? Because when you start talking about some of the megalithic structures in Europe, and, that's the ones I'm more familiar with, we're talking 6, 7, 8, 9,000 BC, not 2,000 BC.
Oh, yeah, they actually right. They did go back surprisingly early. I think Tumulus St. Michael in Gardner's, France, I think is 7,000 BC, almost 9,000 years old. it's almost post-glacial. It's amazingly old. We did go to France. We missed that particular structure. There's just so many of them you can see over there. We went to Caretaker. But our dating on our site was from 16 different carbon datings. And the carbon dating ranged from fairly modern date, some charcoal from when a shoemaker lived on the hilltop, from the 1800s. And the oldest dating we have on the hilltop is 7,500 years old. And that was from a fire pit. It didn't date the walls. It didn't date any of the chambers or anything. But it's just human activity going on top of the hilltop about 7,500 years ago. But the main site was 1 acre of stone chambers. We have a chamber in ruins. It's a chamber we're looking at to do more research on this year, possibly. It's right in the middle of the site, and they got 3 different datings out of that. The oldest one was 4,000 years old in 1971, and they dated some charcoal, and the charcoal was undisturbed next to the wall, and the layers of soil were undisturbed. And then next, they found hammerstones, rubbing stones, stone picks, and they also found below that the bedrock had been removed. All had been built. The north wall of that chamber had been built. Very slowly, sediment and some of the artifacts were left behind, and then some sort of fire took place. And that was in 1971. That was the oldest date on that particular excavation. So we have the date, we think, about 4,000 years old. We began astronomical research in 1967, and the work continued through 1973 when we realized we'll have to have a professional survey team come up and survey all the walls and the site, particularly the stones that are either laying down or standing around the outside of the site, which we think at that time were aligned with the sun, moon, and possibly the stars. So we had a professional survey team come up. It took about 3 or 4 years to do the survey because we paid them to come up and then they'd disappear for a few months. They'd come back when we had money to continue the survey. We called it Phase 1. And in 1977, we sent that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the result was they said that if the site was used for astronomical purposes, due to the Earth's tilt, it very slowly changes. It won't work today, but it would have worked about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 2 centuries. So that put it back to the same time period as the oldest carbon dating of the main site, 4,000 years old. So that was really a real big break in the research for us back in 1977. And the other thing they came up with is they said we had 24 star alignments up there, and we only were aware of the North Star alignment and I think 1 or 2 other alignments. So we still have work to do up there. We don't know what all the other alignments are yet. They're probably helical sunrise alignments, but we have to do more research on that. And all over the hilltop, we found stone tools. So that's just part of it. But 1978, one of our researchers who spent a lot of time working on some of the sites over in Europe, the British government, medieval and megalithic, he's going to come back. He's been working with us since 1978. He said that the big slabs up there were taken off the bedrock as we suspected, but they're all shaped by using hammerstones. There wasn't metal tool technology used to quarry the stone or shape it. It was Stonehenge technology. It's a technique called percussion flaking, kind of like shaping a huge, couple-ton arrowhead. The same method was used to shape the big roof slabs, the wall slabs, the standing stones, and even the sacrificial table. It wasn't done with Middle Age tools. So it's just another supporting piece of evidence. So, and work continues up there today.
Well, I mean, and I think, having alignments show up in the construction, adds to the credibility of the dating, because in the 17th or 18th century, they weren't doing stuff like that. They were just, building a house where they felt like building a house, or building a thing where they felt like building a thing. And you don't find these, alignments to cardinal points, to stars, to anything, except in these structures that come to us from antiquity.
Absolutely. You're right. We know our forefathers built big foundations for carriage houses, barns, houses, town halls. You can see them all over New England, and they did a lot of work. You also find the metal tool markings in this, but they didn't really align them with, like you said, true north, south, east, and west, or any of the, any of the solar alignments or lunar alignments or anything like that. They just didn't do that. They had almanacs if you wanted to know what, exact what day it was, and all that. They had calendars. Really track the motions of the heavens like the ancient people did. And it seems to be a worldwide thing in the ancient times. People did do that. No matter which continent you go to, see that ancient people did watch the motions of the heavens above. And it was, I think part of it was survival, too, besides religious purposes, One thing we did find, besides some evidence supporting European to our site, was we found inscriptions up on the site, as well as throughout New England, actually from New England all the way down to South America.
Wait. Slow down. Inscriptions? So
yeah.
And so what were the inscriptions? I mean, were they able to identify, a textile? Were they, like the Kensington runestone was all in runes, obviously. I mean, were they runic or were they some other text? Alphabet, whatever.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in New England, we think we have some evidence of the Vikings coming in and these runestones from about 1,000 years ago. But on our site, I think chamber ruins are one that we dated the north wall back to 4,000 years. A large roof slab, which weighs approximately 9,000 pounds, has fallen into the structure, which actually has preserved what material there is inside the structure, because most of these chambers were cleaned out by Mr. Goodwin in the 1930s, and the technology and the technique back then wasn't, what it is today. And there's also a large lintel stone that was the entrance, and that fell in too. So we have a chamber that has a lot of information, I think, still buried there. If we can get the large stone out, that's what we're hoping to do this year or next year, is to remove these stones. They attempted it 50 years ago in 1964. They didn't have the equipment to do it. They didn't have the money or the time, really, to get the stone out of there. But what they did find in that chamber were 2 stone tablets, and they were put on display in our museum for 11 years until 1975, unknown markings. And that's the year that Dr. Barry Bell from Harvard University came and first visited with us. And he took him back to his home in Arlington, Mass., and studied these stones. And he was able to translate one, and the other one he identified the script, but it was broken, so he didn't get the complete translation. Well, what he found was one of them was Iberian Punic, or Phoenician, and the other one was Libyan. And the third one they found up on the site, and they found that around the time he was visiting, I guess, was a Celtic Ogham inscription. So we have Phoenician, Libyan, and Celtic Ogham. And he said these markings were the style from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, where the Phoenicians were, the Celts went through there, and the Libyans had been in there too. It was like a melting pot, he said. And they found these inscriptions in Vermont. They found them in New York, your home state. They've been found up in Canada, and they've been found down in Brazil, as a matter of fact. Phoenician writing has been found as far south, and as far north as Maine, Little Manor Island, when Helen in Maine, they found Phoenician script too. And that raised a lot of controversy. You can just imagine, they're not supposed to be here. But so yeah, he was able to identify the type of what the language was and everything. So that was kind of neat. And that was back in 1975. He died 20 years ago this year, but he was a Harvard professor, and he had a group called the Epigraphic Society, and they're still around. I think you can Google epigraphic. The Western Epigraphic Society is pretty active, and they've been going since, I guess, I think he started that group in the 1960s. They're still quite active.
So what happened to the stones?
Well, we still have the stones are on display in our museum, and as a matter of fact, Scott Walters examined the one that was Phoenician, and Barry Bell said that stone said that structure that we talk about, the Chairman Room, was dedicated to Baal, the famous sun god Baal, by the Canaanites. And the other one was Libyan, and unfortunately part of that script is missing. The stone was partially damaged sometime in the past. We don't know what happened to it, but it was broken. And Scott looked at that, and, he's looking at it with his equipment, trying to identify whether the script looked like it was there for a long time or whether it was something that was a hoax put in the last, century or so. And he said it appears to be very, very old. He looked at the weathering patterns on it, I guess, with his electron microscope and started scanning microscopes and all of that. And he said it looked old. But we still have the script. Barry Bell also found in New England a lot of the place names, mountains, rivers, valleys, and gorges, like Lake Nephemagog in Vermont, Portage in Vermont, and the river that goes right by our site is called the Merrimack River. And the Amistad River in New Hampshire, a lot of these names are Algonquin, and they have a certain meaning. The Amistad has a certain meaning. It means falls. And I think Merrimack River, I keep forgetting that one. I think it means a deep river of fish or something like that. But he found in Celtic, or in Gaelic, on the other side of the ocean, the same words with the same meanings. And that was pretty interesting. He didn't find just a few of these words. He found list upon list of words in the Northeast that are the same on both sides of the ocean with the same meaning. And if you had one or two, you might say it's a coincidence, but not list upon list of these things, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I thought it was interesting that you have this stone that you're trying to lift up and out of that chamber that you were mentioning, and that in the 1960s we didn't have good enough equipment to move it. But our ancestors, with their own two hands and without the wheel and without any kind of equipment, were. See, that's the part that always makes me shake my head.
Yeah, it is amazing, yeah. Well, this gentleman that worked on the site for so many years studied that problem. You know, how would they pour these stones and how did they move these multi-ton stones? And yet today we have a difficulty. I mean, we do have cranes today that can lift that stone up, but you have to be able to get it into the site. And that's modern equipment, you know. What did they use back then? And the best he came up with were, you know, log rollers, of course, simple machinery, inclined planes of earth, log levers, and a lot of these big slabs. If you look at them, these huge slabs have like a cutout. On one edge of the stone, they have like this crescent cutout. And we just noticed that over the last several years. I mean, we walked by these things for decades. And only in the last, decade or so, we started really paying attention to them. So that little notch on the stones may have been made that way, so some sort of equipment could help move the stone, but we're not sure what that meant, you know, and how it was used. But they all had this notch on the side of the stone, so it may have been involved with you actually moving the stone somehow. So, but the biggest stone we have on the site is 50 tons, and they actually moved that stone too, which is a lot. And all over the hilltop, we found quarried stones. We thought we only had a few of them still out there, and that the site was almost complete. And then some time they abandoned the site. But recently, in the last 2 years, my son was out there doing some cleaning on the alignments, and we have snowshoe trails, and he was out there cleaning some of them, and we found probably another dozen of these big, huge slabs that were raised off the bedrock, propped up with another stone, and then they were being shaped. We didn't realize to the extent that these people were out there working the hilltop as though they had a much bigger project, or a much bigger construction project on the hilltop, and then something happened. And that was kind of an eye-opener just about 2 years ago, like, wow, they had bigger plans, and then they walked away from it. So that's one of the newest things we've done up there.
Do you know, I mean, and if you don't, that's fine too, because, you know, I think it might be kind of hard to find in New England, but are there any legends, indigenous legends that you've heard of regarding that site?
That's a great question. There was a lady who lived in California, and she grew up there. She was Iroquois, Native American, and her grandfather taught her the history going back, I think, 10,000 years. And she had to learn it a couple different ways so that the story was accurate. And he taught her it over, when she was young, and probably for many years he was teaching her all about their ancient history. And one of the parts of the history was that there were these people on the hills that built these, I guess, stone structures, and they were not her people. They were strange people. They were different people. And she lived in California, and she couldn't really make sense of that. It just didn't add up. She had never heard of the New England or the Northeast structures until, I believe it was in the 1990s, and she either saw it on a TV show or she read a book, and it was a real eye-opener for her that this all fits together. You know, her grandfather talked about these people on the hill that built these structures that she never heard of, and there they were, you know, and the whole story kind of fit together. The book became known as The Walking People, and she was an IBM consultant, too, on top of that, and she visited us, and she did a circle. We did a circle instead of a theater back then, I think about 14 years ago, and unfortunately after that she passed away. But there's still people that are very interested in her work, her studies, and I think they go to Texas, as a matter of fact, and we have like some sort of a seminar down there. One of the people that wrote one of our books on our site, she's a school teacher, and she goes down there, I think, every year to the conference, I think. The lady's name is Paula Underwood, and the name of the book is The Walking People. And we've had some other stories about Native Americans talking about the site, but nothing quite like what she told us. So, which is pretty neat.
Well, I mean, I just think that it's cool that there is anything that comes out, you know, of the area, because when you think of New England, you don't think of Native American culture, you know, being able to hang on to very much of its history or authenticity. really.
Right. Yeah. I think I think it was hepatitis B or smallpox pretty much wiped out most of the Native Americans, so a lot of that was lost, and a lot of the oral tradition was lost because of that. I talked to Keisha Wampanoag from Massachusetts, and her people still talk about what appears to be the Vikings. You know, she says, I believe we're talking, my ancestors, the oral tradition of the oral history is talking about Vikings coming to America. She goes, we know they were here. The Vikings were. And they did find a Viking exit on Cape Cod. And one of the authors talks about the elbow of land. It sounds like Cape, I think it's a Greenland saga. And they also have mooring holes, the Viking-type mooring holes found out there that Scott Walters talks about. And in the Bass River on Cape Cod, they found what looks like a place where the Vikings would put a ship for the winter to do repairs on it. And that was excavated, I think, in the 1940s. I don't know if they came up with any conclusion. It looks like it's a perfect size for a Viking ship and not anything from the 17, 18, or 1900s, any type of ships from that time period. And I don't know if they actually were able to determine whether it was a Viking, place to fix boats, but they did find some Viking evidence. And then down in Newport, Scott talks about that stone, the Narragansett stone, which is either Viking just a little bit later, like their descendants in the Newport Tower. But this Wampanoag, I think she's Wampanoag, she said, yes, there's talk about the Vikings coming over here. It's passed down all these generations 1,000 years later.
So I'm going to kind of shift here and ask a couple of pot-stirring kind of questions. So the first one is, the site is being called America's Stonehenge, but it doesn't look like Stonehenge. So why?
Yeah. Well,
so why Stonehenge?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the function of our place is very similar to Stonehenge in England. The astronomical alignments. The form of it's different for sure. We do have some standing stones, but not like the large trilithons of Stonehenge or any of the uprights. But 1959, when we opened the year after we opened the site to the public, the Saturday Evening Post did a feature story on our site, which is great. It was a great second year for us, and it got a lot of interest that year. And what they referred to our site was a Stonehenge in America, and they said that because of the large stones at our site. And that was in 1959. It wasn't until 1967, really, that we began working the astronomical alignments. So they weren't referring to the alignments. They were just referring to big stones, basically. They called it the Stonehenge of America. So it's kind of a nickname for many years, not really official. But 1983, we changed it to America's Stonehenge. The name of the hill is still Mystery Hill, the actual on the topographical map.
But see, that's a cool story,
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of neat, But,
see, I knew you would have one.
Well, and Cahokia Mountains State Park, some of the biggest pyramids in the world are in the United States, and Cahokia has one of the biggest ones. I've been out there, and its nickname is America's Woodhenge because of that wooden circle that's all astronomically aligned with the quarter days and the cross quarter days. It's a nickname, and I have it on my T-shirt I got out there. But so they even named that after the Woodhenge near Stonehenge, which is a very, very ancient site, too, that Woodhenge. I think it might predate Stonehenge, actually. But it's called America's Woodhenge. So that's how ours was, but now ours officially is America's Stonehenge.
Cool. So there are people that claim that, the site was built, and this is one of my, pot stirring questions, that the site was built in the 17th or 18th century. Has enough evidence been collected, do you think, to prove that they're wrong?
Well, we have, the 17 or 1800s were partly cut off. Yeah, I mean, there's people that feel like the Patty family. They came here in 1734. They were cordwainers or shoemakers, and the guy's name was Seth Patty, and he came up here in 1734, and he may have built a house up there. We're not sure exactly when the house was built, but then his son Seth lived there, and then Jonathan, who we talk a lot about. But the carbon datings, the way the stones were all shaped using stone tools or Stone Age technology to shape the stones, and then the astronomical alignments, and the dating on the astronomical alignments. If Patty set up those, they would have to know the Earth's tilt slowly changes about 1 degree every century. The oblique Earth is 23 degrees, 27 minutes today, but 4,000 years ago, it's tilted about 40 minutes more, about 2/3 of a degree. So the Patties would have had to been kind of aware of that, too, I think. If we're going to set the site up kind of as a hoax or something like that, perhaps, we have to know where the sun was rising and the moon was rising back then because your tilt was different. So The astronomical alignments do agree with the oldest carbon dating on the site. And then we have hammer stones, rubbing stones. We have a lot of points, stone points. We have wedge stone wedges, axes, hoes, all sorts of stone tools that were found on the site itself. So that kind of indicates the age, not the historic or colonial or post-colonial time period.
The stone tools, the axes, the points, etc., that have been found. This is, I'm always accused of coming up with these questions, but were they able to look at them and then tie them to some Native American culture that was in the area, or are they, manufactured and look like something completely different that's not even indigenous to that area?
Well, I think that's a very good question. Yeah, the axe heads, I think one of them in our display case is Algonquin axe. That's identified as that. But that is a good question. I mean, the stone tools, some of them they have rubbing stones, and you can't really identify who used that. It's just a round, perfectly polished stone is used for rubbing hides and stuff like that. We have a stone cup that was found there. But some of them, I think, like a couple arrowheads can be identified as Native American, and probably the axe. They called it the Algonquin axe, We have Holland Pottery on the hill, too, at the glacial cliff shelter that, by the style of it, dates about 2,000 to 2,500 years old. It's Middle Woodland period pottery. And it's a beautiful cliff area that overlooks the Spigot River that runs into the Merrimack. Some people say, well, you're so far from the ocean. Why wouldn't any ocean-going people come to the site? We're only 18 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. In the ocean, actually, the water level was 45 feet higher because the Earth was actually lower. When the glaciers were here, where we are right now is in New Hampshire was pushed down between a quarter and a half a mile by the weight of the ice, and the ice was between a half a mile and a mile above us. When the ice age ended, the Earth has been rebounding very slowly. We have earthquakes here, and we have actually a computer print-off that goes like 20 feet of epicenters and earthquakes, and in our area, right around our site, and it's still active, actually. So the Earth is still rising, but 4,000 years ago, the ocean was a few more miles because the ocean relative to the land was higher. And the Merrimack River comes down 4 miles of our site, and then the Spigot River, which is a tributary, comes right at the bottom of a hill. And the Native Americans that were in that glacial cliff shelter probably spent the summer there. On the other side of the hill in our parking lot, we found the remains of a 30-foot wide wigwam. And that dated to, that dated to about, I'm trying to think of the date on that, about 2,000 years old, I think, about the same time period as that pottery. And so that was a winter camp, summer camp. But the Spigot River would allow access from our site to the ocean, actually, at that time, I think.
Still there, Dennis?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I thought you cut out again. So,
yeah.
But I got another question for you. One of the things that you hear, we talked about astronomical alignments, etc. Was there any calendar stone found on the site or a stone calendar like you would find at Stonehenge?
Let's see. We do have one stone that was found, and very well identified the script that was written on the side of it. It was actually one of these monoliths, and he identified it as the letters, and it was around the time of Christ, so it looks like it was a later time period. The site could have been used for a long period of time, or used and then disused and then used later in time. He puts it back before the time of Christ, but not too far before that. And the letters say 39 La, and it means 39 day. And he believes it's a time period between the spring equinox and May Day. And at that, and the numerals is actually in kind of like Roman numerals that the Celts could have used or somebody else could have used. You'd have to look at American BC book to explain what he was talking about. But it actually helps to identify a time period that the site was used at a later time. But we do have the quarter days, which is summer, winter, spring, and fall, and then the cross quarter days, May 1st, August 1st, February 1st, and November 1st. And this particular stone seemed to identify a period of time that the site could have been used just before the time of Christ. That time period of 39 days is today, I think it's because of the precession of the equinoxes, it's changed. It's actually, I think, more days today. But he says when it was 39 days between and it would have been at this time in the past. And because of the style of the writing, too, of the numerals. But we have alignments with the moon, the 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycle. And we have a true north alignment. And then we have another one aligned with the star Isa, that 14-foot stone I mentioned earlier. And then we have 23 other star alignments that we still have to look at. But the summer solstice sunrise, that's one that Scott has on that TV show. It's still, from our site through that stone, 4 miles distance, is a perfectly natural notch formed by 2 hills. If the sun rises on that notch, it rises on our stone, and the stone was shaped to fit into the notch, actually. And if you go 3,200 miles, you go right through the largest trilothon, the one in the middle of the horseshoe at Stonehenge. It goes right through that. And that's the thing my son found. I think that was 2 years ago about this time, and then it ended up on Scott's show.
Yeah. So this, we tried to recreate what you did on our tablet, which wasn't very successful. But where, okay, so there was from your location through Stonehenge, but, if that line continued to be a giant circle, okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if that line continued to be a giant circle, did it go through any other place really interesting? Because it just seems like, when you talk about ley lines and you talk about sacred sites, that, it's constantly hitting.
I read about ley lines. I don't know, I don't know if they're intentional, but there are people that believe that, in sacred geometry of the earth, and if you put these ancient sites in certain spots in the earth, draw more energy out of the earth. Perhaps. I know Alfred Watkins talked about ley lines, and I guess he noticed them in England. One site like Old Sarum and Stonehenge, I've been to Old Sarum, and a couple other Glastonbury, they all lined up, He said, I don't think that's a coincidence. These sites seem to be put, in a certain position, relationship to one another, like straight lines, But, that alignment does go through Stonehenge, and then if you continue, it goes right over to Beirut, Lebanon, which is one of the Phoenician cities, Blybos, I think it was here, the Phoenicians had 50 cities set up for trade around the Mediterranean and around Africa, but that's one of their cities too, and that's where the line goes right into that, and that kind of caught Scott's interest, in it, how they would have done that, why they would have done that, and is it just a big coincidence? It's in any event, it's in chills down our back. We saw the one particularly went right through Stonehenge, that we never knew that for all these years. We had no idea. But if you go the opposite way, the solstice sunset, it goes right near the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan. We were there about 30 years ago. That was quite the complex. But the moon pyramid, this alignment goes right near that, or right across it. We have to do a little bit more work with Google Earth to make sure the accuracy of these things. Because if you're off just a tiny bit, you can either make it work or it can miss it by quite a bit. Our south alignment goes right towards Machu Picchu in Peru, like all World Heritage Sites. And these could be coincidental. The equinox sunrise goes right near the pyramids in the I'm trying to think, is it the Azores? There's pyramids over there. It's on a big world map. I'm not looking at it right now, but there are pyramids there, and it goes right by those pyramids, our equinox sunrise alignment. So it could be just coincidental, but we thought it was kind of interesting.
No, but see, that is interesting, and I'm glad I asked that question because, to me, based on what I know from all these other places, that there needed to be just more than that one connection, that there needed to be a bunch of different connections, so it's like, cool, but again, it adds to the credibility because that's a theme that you see consistently when you start looking at these really ancient sites, is that they have these weird incidental, geographic connections to other sites on the planet.
It seems like it does, and there's been a number of them. I mean, you've talked to many of them. One of them recently, I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. He had us.
Hey, Dennis. Dennis.
Go ahead.
I just looked at the clock, and we are out of time. I am so sorry. We are out of time.
Yeah.
So, Dennis, if somebody wants to come visit your property, if they want to come check out America's Stonehenge, where is the best place for them to go get information to come see you?
Yeah, the website, StonehengeUSA.com, and then there's an email address if people have questions. I'd be glad to try to answer them. But the website has events on it, like our winter solstice, summer solstice celebrations. It has a telephone number, and you can call us on that number. And it also has links to other places like New England Antiquities Research Association, a group my dad formed, and having the 50th anniversary this year. And they just had the spring meeting. And that website will take you to a lot of these sites we talked about all over the Northeast, and actually even sites even out in the Midwest. And it's called NERA, NEARA.org, actually, NERA.org, New England Antiquities Research Association. And that's one of the links here, and that's really good. It'll show you these sites. It's really interesting. But that would be definitely a good place to go to. Great.
Dennis, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing America's Stonehenge with America and the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. Nice talking to you.
You too. That's Dennis Stone. His webpage is StonehengeUSA.com. Next week, we're going to be speaking with Stephen Strong about Our Forgotten Origin, a new theory on human civilization, and Paul Von Ward, Children of a Living Universe. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.just-energy.com